Hello guys, welcome back to our anime moments. Guys, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Today is explanation of upcoming episode of Soul Land 2 Part 249 based on novel. So let's start. This sensation was truly frightening. He was starting to understand what Zhongli Wu's martial soul was. His martial soul was not just one which only offered strengthening and support. Instead, his martial soul also possessed powerful fighting strength. This fighting strength was what Zhongli Wu had gained a result of the fusion between his spirit and his body, as well as the enhancement gained from his mutated martial soul. Similar to how Xu Sanqi's martial soul had evolved into the Xuanwu shield, Zhongli Wu's martial soul was probably also continually evolving as his cultivation continued to improve. Its real name should be called the Death God Demon Puppet. Yes, the Death God Demon Puppet. The Death God Doluo's martial soul was the Blood Soul Demon Puppet. It was already an extremely powerful martial soul. However, Zhongli Wu's martial soul was even stronger than his mother's. Death God Doluo? From the current look of things, Zhongli Wu was more deserving of the title. After all, his martial soul true body was the Death God's true body itself. The Bone Dragon King must be the Death God's mount. This must be Zhongli Wu at his most powerful state. No wonder he did not panic at all when I repeatedly blocked his attacks. That's because he had been holding back all this while. Hui Yuhao did not release his martial soul true body. The Snow Empress and Ice Empress were still asleep, and the eyes of the Azura were not ideal for close combat. And based on the situation before him, close combat seemed to be the only option. Neither of them would be able to run away from that. The Bone Dragon King let out a deafening roar as its gigantic body soared into the sky. Its frightening wings flapped intensely as it blocked everyone's view of the sun and the clouds. It carried the Death God above its head as it surged towards Hui Yuhao. Even though its body was enormous, it was able to fly at an incredibly fast speed. Within a split second, the gigantic Death God's sickle was right before Hui Yuhao. 6 fire wind vortexes also appeared around Hui Yuhao at this instant as they made sure that he couldn't move away to avoid Zhongli Wu's attack. The frightening, suffocating sensation threatened to tear Hui Yuhao apart. Hui Yuhao's eyes immediately radiated intense light. The Eye of Destiny on his forehead had long been activated, and a streak of purple-golden light slammed into the head of the Bone Dragon King. The green spirit fire instantly trembled vigorously. The 6 fire wind vortexes disintegrated immediately as Zhongli Wu lost control over them, and they released a series of violent air currents. Even though Zhongli Wu was also caught in the air currents, he was not really affected by them, as he was a user of wind-type and fire-type power. The Death God's sickle in his hand did not even budge as he continued to advance towards Hui Yuhao. Cling! Hui Yuhao had raised his Morning Dew dagger to block Zhongli Wu's Death God's sickle. Immediately, Hui Yuhao found himself thrown backward by the incredible force produced by the collision. While he was flying backward, his entire body was enshrouded by streaks of black air. Those black currents were somehow able to fuse into his body directly. In fact, most of them went straight for his head, as though they were trying to consume his soul. On the other hand, Zhongli Wu only shook a little on the head of the Bone Dragon King. He merely had to adjust his footing to find his balance again. The Death God's sickle in his hand now had an additional blue layer of ice on it. However, the blue ice was rapidly melting under the impact of the black current released from Zhongli Wu's body. This was absolute power. The power of the Death God. Even though Hui Yuhao was being thrown backward by the force, his eyes were radiating with passion and enthusiasm. Yes, this was the pressure he wanted. Even Elder Xian would not have been able to give him this stifling sensation. This was because Elder Xian did not possess any murderous intent against him. The yin-yang complement soul cores within his body were rotating at an insane speed as the streaks of soul power which were perpetually colliding against one another produced a soul power vortex. It was running at a speed that was at least 3 times its normal speed. Hui Yuhao's power was continually ejected from his body into his surroundings. His soul cores were the true trump card he had against Zhongli Wu. Hui Yuhao's regenerative ability was way above any normal soul master because of his yin-yang complement soul cores. Hence, the soul power he had actually expended would always be less than what it seemed on the surface. However, Zhongli Wu's fighting strength had also exceeded his expectations. The Death God's sickle was indeed very powerful. This sickle appeared to be the evolved state of the staff he had produced from his first soul skill. However, Hu Yuhao could tell with his spiritual detection that it was actually his 8th soul skill. Zhongli Wu had only become so strong because he had used his 7th soul skill, Death God True Body, and his 8th soul skill, Death God Sickle. He would definitely stand a chance against a real ultimate Doluo with these 2 soul skills. After that collision, even the ultimate ice ability of the Morning Dew Dagger was unable to completely seal the death aura contained within the Death God's sickle. This frightening death aura was actually eating away at Hu Yuhao's body at an incredibly fast speed. Even though the Icy War God's armor was able to filter off a significant portion of it, some parts of it had still managed to creep into the armor. It was like a persistent worm that was able to eat through anything. Because of how hard it was to remove the death aura, it would be an extremely serious problem for anyone who was to find his or her body attacked by it. However, Hu Yuhao was the exception. After creeping into his body, the death aura was about to begin to devour his life energy. These streaks of death aura were able to strengthen themselves by devouring life energy until Hu Yuhao was dead. That was the power of the Death God. However, the streaks of death aura found themselves up against countless tiny vortexes after creeping into Hu Yuhao's body. These vortexes contained Hu Yuhao's spiritual power and ultimate ice. Even though the vortexes were not able to directly dissolve the death aura, they were able to latch themselves onto the death aura. Following which, both of them would be ejected from Hu Yuhao's body under his careful control. There was also an extra coat of black on the Morning Dew Dagger. If one were to go up close to look at it, one would realize that it was a small black vortex which contained an incredibly frightening amount of power. You should surrender now. You will never stand a chance against me. I don't want to kill you. With the gifts you possess, you can definitely become my successor at the Holy Ghost Church. Zhongli Wu spoke coldly. Even then, his eyes showed the pity and admiration he had for Hu Yuhao's talent. Zhongli Wu was able to sense that Hu Yuhao was still not a transcendent Doluo from their previous collision. Hu Yuhao was only able to parry his blow because of his human-shaped soul tool and the godly weapon. On the other hand, Zhongli Wu was an actual rank 98 transcendent Doluo. There was a gap between their abilities that could not be bridged. Just his beast spirit alone was enough to negate the difference between their martial souls. Hu Yuhao shook his head obstinately as he said, "Tell me that again only after you have defeated me." As he spoke, he raised the Morning Dew Dagger once again as a look of determination formed on his face. The violent wind-type and fire-type power continually attacked his body as his Icy War God's armor radiated a powerful glow. How is he not affected by the death aura? Zhongli Wu's eyes widened in disbelief. There's no way the death aura has not had any effect on him. He must have found a way to suppress it temporarily. The gigantic bone dragon let out another roar as it flapped its wings before flying towards Hu Yuhao again. Even though Hu Yuhao had hurt it with his spiritual shock, the damage sustained by its soul was still limited because its soul was fused with Zhongli Wu's. Just when the gigantic dragon started to fly towards Hu Yuhao, Zhongli Wu made his move. He waved his gigantic death god sickle once again as its scary black blade slashed across the sky. The blade seemed to have torn apart the space which separated it and Hu Yuhao as it instantly appeared before him. The attack was so fast that Hu Yuhao could only block it with his Morning Dew Dagger. Once again, he was knocked back by the powerful force. This time around, he did not even have the time to release his spiritual shock before the sickle came for him. While he was flying backwards due to the impact, streaks of black fog flickered around him as they tried to devour him. The Bone Dragon King accelerated as it appeared where Hu Yuhao had landed almost instantly. It took aim as it swept its gigantic dragon tail towards Hu Yuhao's waist. Hu Yuhao's body flew away like a home-run baseball as he was hit once again. The Icy War God's armor let out a deafening sound after it was hit by the dragon tail. The most frightening thing was how large vortexes of fire-type and wind-type energy continued to attack his body even though he had been sent flying away from the Bone Dragon King. Throughout the entire attack, Zhongli Wu never left the head of the Bone Dragon King. Once again, he slashed his death god's sickle as it tore apart the space before him. A black image flickered before disappearing into the void. The same black figure ripped apart the space Hui Yuhao would go by along his flight trajectory as he reappeared before him. The figure seemed like the spitting image of Zhongli Wu as it slashed the sickle in its hand onto Hui Yuhao's body. Everyone who was watching the battle could not help but hold their breath as they watched the sight before them unfold. That's it. Hui Yuhao is probably going to be finished this time around. Cling! Just when everyone expected the sickle to land on Hui Yuhao's body, he suddenly turned his body in midair as he waved his morning dew dagger towards the sickle at an impossible angle. He managed to block the deadly blow of the sickle with his dagger. However, his body was once again sent flying away. By now, his icy war god's armor was shrouded with death aura. It seemed as though he was about to be consumed by the black streaks of energy. Hui Yuhao no longer tried to fight Zhongli Wu as he turned around and tried to fly into the distant sky. Are you trying to flee? I don't think you can run away from me. Zhongli Wu let out a burst of cold laughter. Because their spirits were fused, the Bone Dragon King immediately understood his intent as it flapped its humongous wings. At the next instant, it was already more than 1,000 meters from where it had been. It was almost as if they had teleported as they continued their pursuit of Hui Yuhao. Right now, it seemed as though the battle was finally coming to an end. It was extraordinarily hard for soul masters above the title Dolor rank to turn the tables after their opponent had gained a serious upper hand. Hui Yuhao had undoubtedly sustained injuries after receiving those blows from Zhongli Wu and his Bone Dragon King. That was apparent from how he was unable to retaliate against their power. Right now, he was trying to flee so that he could suppress the power of the death god which was trying to ravage his body. However, what would happen next? Zhongli Wu's attacks would simply continue. He had to figure out another way to handle him and his mount. While Zhongli Wu was chasing after Hui Yuhao, he was surprised to discover that Hui Yuhao's icy war god's armor was still functional. It was still accelerating Hui Yuhao in an intermittent but explosive manner. The armor was able to increase the distance between Hui Yuhao and Zhongli Wu as they went around in circles. Such explosive acceleration would be extremely demanding on the user's soul power. What is this lad trying to do? Zhongli Wu simply let out a burst of cold laughter as he continued to go after Hui Yuhao. Even though the sky had turned dark, he was in no hurry at all. The blue pillar that was shining on Hui Yuhao from the sky had gradually disappeared. Without support from this pillar, Zhongli Wu believed that Hui Yuhao would not be able to last much longer. However, a strange white light suddenly shot towards Zhongli Wu and the Bone Dragon King at this instant. Zhongli Wu was startled by the white light, and he instinctively slashed at it with his death god's sickle. However, the sickle was not able to block the light. The white light was somehow able to pass through the incredible death god power and land on the body of the Bone Dragon King. Zhongli Wu had already cultivated the Bone Dragon King to become his origin beast spirit. Hence, their spirits were already deeply intertwined. Even though the white light did not seem to have caused any harm to the Bone Dragon King, Zhongli Wu felt an intense sense of uneasiness in his heart. It was also at this instant that Hui Yuhao, who had been trying to flee from Zhongli Wu, suddenly turned around and released a mystical power from his body. The streaks of black energy that were hanging onto his icy war god's armor were somehow transformed into tiny vortexes before they started to scatter towards Zhongli Wu. Those black vortexes did not only contain the death aura that belonged to the death god, but also Hui Yuhao's ultimate ice and spiritual power. Zhongli Wu was not prepared to be complacent as the Bone Dragon King beneath him released its powerful breath to neutralize the power stored within those tiny vortexes. However, because of this little interjection, its flying speed was affected. At this instant, Zhongli Wu suddenly heard Hui Yuhao release a cold grunt. He then noticed how the icy war god's armor, which was now cleared of all the black energy streaks, had lost its dark blue glow. Instead, it now took on a crystalline gray color. A gigantic projection suddenly appeared behind Hui Yuhao's back. This figure was extremely peculiar. It was actually a gigantic turtle. It was a gigantic turtle that was completely golden. Hee. It's time for Hui Yuhao to retaliate. Someone from the crowd that was gathered nearer to Shrek City sniggled to himself. A golden light flickered as it instantly attached itself to Hui Yuhao and Zhongli Wu. Following which, everyone was surprised to see how both of them had swapped positions at that very instant. Zhongli Wu had appeared where Hui Yuhao was, and Hui Yuhao was now standing above the head of the Bone Dragon King. Hui Yuhao was now wielding the Morning Dew dagger with both of his hands. The dagger was now pointing downwards. A layer of white light suddenly surged from Hui Yuhao's body before it gushed into the Morning Dew dagger. The Bone Dragon King beneath Hui Yuhao started to panic as it attempted to break free from him. However, Hui Yuhao's feet remained rooted on the dragon's head as though they were glued to it. At the same time, a golden ring of light radiated from Hui Yuhao's head, and enveloped the entire head of the Bone Dragon King. Spiritual blast? A silent explosion occurred around the Bone Dragon King's head. Its green spirit fire could now be seen from the crack in its skull caused by the spiritual blast. Zhongli Wu tried to rush back from where he had been teleported, but he could not help but let out a grunt of pain. His massive death god true body started to shrink rapidly. This is impossible. The Bone Dragon King's spirit fire is immensely powerful. This spiritual blast is obviously not as powerful as the previous spiritual shock. Why would it instantly sustain such a heavy injury? Unless it was because of the white light? Yes, it was because of the white light. That was one of the two divine skills the three-eyed golden lion had passed on to Hui Yuhao. It was called spiritual reaving. It was able to instantly reduce an enemy's spiritual defense to 0. Hui Yuhao immediately brought the sharp Morning Dew dagger downwards and stabbed it deep into the skull of the Bone Dragon King. The Bone Dragon King let out a painful howl as cracks started to form on its skull. Streaks of white light instantly enveloped the head of the Bone Dragon King. Upon coming into contact with the white light, its spirit fire was instantly doused. The humongous body of the Bone Dragon King immediately turned stiff and still. Purification power. Hui Yuhao had been intentionally acting in a passive manner as he allowed himself to be attacked continuously by Zhongli Wu and the Bone Dragon King. Even now, his mouth was still bleeding. He had done all of the above just so that he could buy himself enough time to chant his incantations. He had allowed the death aura released by Zhongli Wu to remain on his icy war god's armor just so that it could help him conceal the necromantic abilities he was about to unleash. This battle was not just about competing against one another's power. It was a battle of wisdom and intellect. So at the end of the day, who had managed to trick who? While Zhongli Wu was dashing back to the Bone Dragon King, he suddenly stopped in midair as he released an inhuman shriek. Very soon, his massive death god body transformed back into his human form. Zhongli Wu immediately vomited large amounts of blood from his mouth. Ultimately, the extremely powerful beast spirit was connected to Zhongli Wu. In fact, it was almost a part of him. Hence, Hui Yuhao was able to injure him very badly when he killed his beast spirit. This was something Zhongli Wu had not expected. He could not understand how his immensely powerful Bone Dragon King was unable to withstand a single blow from Hui Yuhao. At the end of the day, spectral creatures were still spectral creatures. No matter how strong the Bone Dragon King was, it would never be able to escape the limitations of a spectral creature. And Hui Yuhao was currently the only necromancer in the entire Dolor continent. Purification power was the natural enemy of any spectral creature. Even if the spectral creature, like the Bone Dragon King, was extremely powerful, it would still be vulnerable to purification power. The combination of spiritual shock, spiritual blast, and the Morning Dew dagger was simply acting as a conduit for the final blow, which involved Hui Yuhao's purification power. Under such circumstances, the Bone Dragon King would never be able to withstand it, even though it was extremely powerful. Hui Yuhao had been waiting for this opportunity from the beginning of the battle until now. He had first improved himself by sensing the pressure from his opponent before unleashing the potential that was forced out by his opponent. Subsequently, he feigned weakness to tempt his opponent into attacking him before he retaliated at the most crucial moment. Everything went according to his plan. Zhongli Wu's biggest mistake was that he had forgotten the fact that Hui Yuhao was actually a control-type soul master. The white purification power quickly spread across the massive body of the Bone Dragon King. It had now completely lost its soul, and the elements were no longer under its control. Zhongli Wu appeared to be frozen in midair as he stared at Hui Yuhao with hatred in his eyes. He did not feel that he deserved to lose. He could naturally see how Hui Yuhao was supposed to be weaker than him. After all, Hui Yuhao was only a titled Doluo. He believed that Hui Yuhao had only defeated him by using an unknown power. However, he had forgotten how evil soul masters usually had an advantage over normal soul masters because of how unorthodox their skills were. When Zhongli Wu raised the staff in his hand again, his hand was already trembling. Once again, the frightening aura spread around him. It was almost as though his aura had not been affected by his injuries. Hui Yuhao also straightened his back as the dark blue light formed once again on his icy war god's armor. The morning dew dagger's blade was also radiating a brilliant glow as its blinding light traveled across the sky. At the same time, the dagger was also emanating an ultimate ice aura from its blade. Hui Yuhao, you have won. Zhongli Wu nodded in Hui Yuhao's direction. However, from this moment onwards, you will be considered one of the greatest enemies of our Holy Ghost Church. In the near future, we will definitely do whatever it takes to kill you instead of forcing you to join us. You seem to be in possession of a power which threatens me. No matter what, we will never allow you to become an ultimate Doluo, because if that happens, the Holy Ghost Church's days will be numbered. You might have won today, but you will definitely die the next time we meet. After finishing his sentence, Zhongli Wu's body suddenly released a blinding light. Following which, he transformed into a black meteor as he sped into the distant sky. He did not even return to join the Sun Moon Empire's army. Now that he had lost, he definitely had to receive military punishment according to the military order. Hence, he could only choose to leave for now. The other members of the Holy Ghost Church were at a loss right now. Even until now, they were still not quite sure how their leader had lost. It was simply beyond comprehension. There was a deafening silence from the Sun Moon Empire's side, whereas the Shrek Academy's side cheered euphorically after a short pause. This was the fifth match. Hui Yuhao had already won his fifth battle. Hui Yuhao was actually able to kill two powerful evil soul masters from the Holy Ghost Church before abducting another person. Following which, he went on to defeat two more individuals. It was important to note that all of them were transcendent Doluo. In fact, one of them was the leader of the Holy Ghost Church. Regardless of whether Hui Yuhao was unable to win his remaining battles, he had undoubtedly made a name for himself after today. From this moment onwards, he was officially initiated into the group of individuals that every soul master on the Doluo continent would revere. The gigantic bone dragon king's body dropped from the sky before shattering to pieces. Hui Yuhao descended with it, and landed at a place which was not too far from the bones. He planted a single knee on the ground as he started to pant rapidly. It had been an extremely difficult battle for him. The attacks from the death god's sickle had ultimately injured him. In order to create an opportunity to turn the tables and conceal his necromantic abilities, he had had to bear with it. The cost of bearing those attacks were immense soul power expenditure and injuries. The dark blue light on Hui Yuhao's icy war god's armor continued to glow as he gradually stood up straight again. Because he was wearing his armor, no one could see him clearly. In fact, the light on the icy war god's armor was not the least bit dimmer than before. A heavy silence had fallen upon the Sun Moon Empire troops. After watching 5 transcendent Doluo which were all evil soul masters crumble under Hui Yuhao's powers, none of them were confident of fighting him. They believed that even an ultimate Doluo might not have achieved this feat with ease. However, Hui Yuhao was somehow able to pull it off. The Class 9 soul engineers who were standing behind Zhu Zi revealed a look of fear. None of them wanted to die at Hui Yuhao's hands on this battlefield. Even though they knew that he had expended a large amount of soul power, no one dared to volunteer to fight him. After the leader of the Holy Ghost Church had been defeated, the remaining members of the Holy Ghost Church were not going to challenge Hui Yuhao anymore. Feng Ling led the remaining members to Zhu Zi and bowed as one. Afterward, they did not say anything as they retreated to the back of the contingent. Zhongli Wu had fled, as he was not willing to accept military punishment. This also meant that he was no longer there to question Zhu Zi's decisions. Without a military supervisor, the War God Empress was now the sole owner of the entire army. Juzi was elated after her objective had been achieved. The evil soul masters were finally killed and Zhongli Wu had been chased away with Hui Yuhao's help. Her plan was finally completed. So what if she were to retreat without attacking Shrek City? It was important to solve one's internal affairs before looking to tackle one's external problems. This was something she understood very well. However, her elation did not last very long. Worries and frustration started to enter her mind. This was because Hui Yuhao was simply too strong. Juzi understood Hui Yuhao a lot better than any of the Class 9 soul engineers around her. It was definitely disadvantageous for him to exhibit such power in front of them. Even though Juzi had known that Hui Yuhao was the person who had been destroying huge amounts of aerial surveillance soul tools within the Sun Moon Empire, the others did not know. Most of the people and higher-ups from the Sun Moon Empire did not even know of his existence. However, this was about to change. Hui Yuhao had shown how he was able to take down 5 powerful evil soul masters, including the leader, from the Holy Ghost Church consecutively. He was definitely going to become famous after so many people had watched him achieve this feat before their eyes. At the same time, he would also be prioritized as the main killing target by the Sun Moon Empire. A young and brilliant soul master like him would definitely become one of the key members within Shrek Academy. In fact, he was most likely going to become one of the leaders within the entire world of soul masters. Now that he was trying to go against everything the Sun Moon Empire was doing, Xu Qianran would not be able to eat and sleep in peace without killing him. At the same time, the Holy Ghost Church would also be looking for an opportunity to exact their revenge. Juzi's mind was a mess. Hui Yuhao's incredible power was affecting the plans she had laid out. However, after her attitude changed, she was no longer that concerned with all of those plans she had prepared. She was more worried about Hui Yuhao getting into serious trouble. Hui Yuhao gradually stood up straight. Even though his breathing was still fairly rapid, there was no sign of weakness in his pupils. In fact, his eyes were extremely radiant. Hui Yuhao had pitted his courage and intelligence against Zhongli Wu in this battle and had managed to defeat him, despite the odds being against him. This battle had a tremendous effect on him. As the yin-yang complement soul cores rotated with an unbelievable speed within his body, the huge amount of soul power he had expended was recovering at an incredibly fast speed. Title Doluo were extremely powerful because they possessed a soul core. Ultimate Duluos were able to tower above every other soul master because they possessed 2 soul cores. It was through such battles that Hui Yuhao was better able to understand the benefits his 2 soul cores offered to him. As of now, his abilities were not sufficiently mature to allow him to fight powerful soul masters like Zhongli Wu. He had to rely on external power like his Icy War God's armor and the Morning Dew dagger. However, he believed that he would not have any problem attaining the rank of an ultimate Doluo with the help of his 2 soul cores. Next. Hui Yuhao's cold voice echoed across the battlefield. Just when everyone believed that he would try his best to delay the proceedings so that he could recover more soul power, he went ahead to request the next battle from the Sun Moon Empire. This entire challenge had started to take on a different flavor after Zhongli Wu was defeated. Initially, no one had believed that Hui Yuhao would be able to accomplish this feat. Now, the powerful individuals within the Sun Moon Empire were starting to fear him. After all, he had used his abilities to prove to everyone that it could be done. Without the Holy Ghost Church calling the shots, the soul engineers from the Sun Moon Empire all looked at Juzi. By now, Juzi was no longer absorbed in her thoughts. In fact, the gasp she had made earlier did not seem to have been noticed by the others. Or at the very least, no one understood why she gasped. "Who among you is willing to take down Hui Yuhao?" Juzi asked in a composed manner. Right now, she had more than 10 Class 9 soul engineers standing around her. There were legion commanders from the various soul engineer legions and several worshipped from the Imperial Shrine. Only these Class 9 soul engineers would be qualified to fight Hui Yuhao. However, none of these soul engineers had attained the equivalent rank of a transcendent Doluo. They could only rely on their soul tools if they were to fight him. Besides, they had all witnessed the previous battles. None of them were confident of defeating Hui Yuhao. After all, this was a battle which concerned their life and death. If even Zhongli Wu was defeated by him, it was very unlikely that they could return alive. There was complete silence for a good few seconds as Ju Zi revealed a growingly furious expression. Some of the Soul Engineers who were weaker started to become embarrassed. It was extremely shameful that the Sun Moon Empire no longer had an individual who was brave enough to accept Hui Yuhao's challenge. All this while, the Sun Moon Empire had been invincible. They had never experienced such a shameful and humiliating situation. "Marshal, I am willing to fight Hui Yuhao." A bright voice could be heard from the back. A Soul Engineer from the Terraclaw Soul Engineer Legion stood up. One could tell that he was just a normal Soul Engineer from the Soul tools which he was equipped with. He was at best a Class 5 Soul Engineer. However, one could tell that he was not afraid of Hui Yuhao at all from the gusto in his voice. After hearing what he said, every single Class 9 Soul Engineer revealed a frustrated look. At the same time, they were embarrassed that a Class 5 Soul Engineer was more willing to put his life on the line to protect the name of their empire than them. Then, another Soul Engineer stormed out and exclaimed, "Can you not be a fool and overestimate your ability? Do you think you are qualified to represent our army? Scram, or I will punish you by military law." This person who had stormed out was concealed within a black human-shaped soul tool. There were two long blades were sheathed behind his back. His entire body was radiating an extremely powerful piercing aura. One could see how the young Soul Engineer wanted to rebut what he had just been told. However, the young Soul Engineer ultimately lowered his head and retreated into the contingent. The Soul Engineer who was wearing a human-shaped soul tool turned around before bowing toward Ju Zi. "Marshal, allow me to represent our empire." Ju Zi nodded and said, "All right. Take care, Commander Liao." "Thank you, Marshal." The Soul Engineer who had just stepped forward would definitely not have volunteered to fight Hui Yuhao if he had a choice. However, there was no way he could afford to not step forward. This was because he was Liao Menkai, the Legion commander of the Terraclaw Soul Engineer Legion. After seeing how his subordinate had the courage to represent the Empire, there was no way he would be able to lead his Soul Engineer Legion if he were to continue to cower. Hence, despite not having much confidence, he still stood up to take up the challenge. Amongst the hand that protects the nation, the Sun Moon Imperial Soul Engineer Legion was undoubtedly the strongest. They were followed by the Imperial Dragon Soul Engineer Legion. The last three were the Fire Phoenix Soul Engineer Legion, the Evil Eye Tyrant Soul Engineer Legion, and the Terraclaw Soul Engineer Legion. The Imperial Dragon Soul Engineer Legion was extremely powerful because of the resources they had hoarded. The Fire Phoenix Soul Engineer Legion had also improved a lot after the War God Empress had taken over. The Evil Eye Tyrant Soul Engineer Legion specialized in speed. They were extremely great at pursuing enemies and then killing them. What about the Terraclaw Soul Engineer Legion? They were definitely the most unorthodox Soul Engineer Legion among the 5 legions which formed the hand that protects the nation. As stated in their name, the Terraclaw Soul Engineer Legion specialized in assault operations. The Dark Golden Terraclaw Bear was known as the strongest assault-type soul beast. Its close combat ability was unparalleled among soul beasts of a similar level. The Terraclaw Soul Engineer Legion was exactly the same. Other than some of the necessary linked defensive soul tools, all of their members specialized in close combat. This also meant that this Soul Engineer Legion primarily consisted of close combat Soul Engineers. Ranged attacks were the most common attacking style among Soul Engineers. However, the fighting power of a close combat Soul Engineer was, in fact, a concept that was very similar to what Hui Yuhao had initially envisioned. He had wanted to see the fusion of the abilities a Soul Master and a Soul Engineer possessed. By relying on soul tools to enhance one's martial soul's fighting ability, one would be able to strengthen one's attacking power within a limited range. This was something all close combat Soul Engineers were trying to work towards. For example, Ji Juechen was essentially a close combat Soul Engineer. To a certain extent, Hui Yuhao was also a close combat Soul Engineer. Once one cultivated his close combat ability to their maximum potential, their overall combat ability would even outpower that of a ranged attack. At the same time, one's survivability would be greatly enhanced. Hence, the Terraclaw Soul Engineer Legion was often dispatched to assault fortified structures. Their members were all extremely disciplined, and were not afraid of dying. Liao Menkai was the legion commander of this Soul Engineer Legion. This naturally meant that he was extremely skilled in close combat fighting. After deciding that he would accept the challenge, Liao Menkai did not hesitate anymore as he leaped from where he was to where Hu Yuhao was currently standing. He immediately accelerated through the air as he raced toward him. Even though no one knew how much soul power Hu Yuhao had expended in his previous battles, everyone knew that they must have taken a lot out of him. Hence, he knew that he had to try his best to reduce the amount of time Hu Yuhao could use to recover his power. This was the best way to improve his odds of defeating him. Even though a titled Dolor possessed incredible regenerative ability, it was ultimately limited. In addition, recovering one's expended spiritual power was a lot more difficult than recovering soul power. When Liao Menkai leaped into the air, the black human-shaped soul tool on his body instantly released a dark golden glow. He grabbed the blades which were sheathed behind his back with both hands before unsheathing them. His pair of blades were matte black, and did not seem to reflect any light at all. At the same time, they gave off the impression that they could devour anything that stood in their way. Even though they were radiating their sharp aura from a distance, everyone was still able to sense how intense their aura was. While they were being brought across the air, they seemed to be leaving two fine traces after slicing through the air. Hu Yuhao's spiritual detection landed on him instantly. This person has an incredible amount of life energy. Hu Yuhao was startled to discover that the life energy this soul engineer was radiating was actually comparable to his. It was a lot more powerful than what a normal titled Dolor had. Even though one's life energy would not directly decide one's fighting power, a powerful individual with strong life energy tended to display powerful abilities during battles, and was usually able to sustain high combat performance over extended periods of time. However, so what? This video will end here.